Ko whetu matarau te maunga, ko awatere te awa, ko te whānau atu whakairi ora te hapu ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. Ko te ramaroa te maunga, ko whirinaki te awa, ko te hikatū te hapu ko ngā puhi te iwi. Tihei mauri ora. Mr. President, Musa Haraj. I began my contribution tonight by wrapping around me my whakapapa o lineage. In my Indigenous language, I refer to my ancestral mountains, my sacred rivers, my collective peoples. I belong to the kinship groups of Te Rarawa, Ngapuhi, Ngāti Porou, and Ngāti Tahinga. This is how my people introduce ourselves. Sometimes we don't even get to our names. Anything we have to say cannot stand without first saying who we are and where we are from. And that is the point, I assure you, when speaking against empire. So thank you for coming with me on this. You will know me first by the waters and soils that hold the blood and dreams of my elders. This introduction is not just a metaphorical anchor to place. Those mountains really are my ancient elders. We have a saying, ko au te awa, ko te awa, ko au. I am the river, and the river is me. She flows through our veins as life force. Now, in a traditional setting, you would also hear the name of my waterfalls, my marae or traditional meeting houses, my waka or sea voyaging vessels, my rangatira, my chiefs, and my burial grounds. But the short version that I instead offered lets you all off the hook tonight. What this introduction still signals is eons of connection my people have as tangata whenua, people of the land, to Aotearoa, which you know as New Zealand. It signals a relationship with our living systems rather than dominance over them. It signals centuries of Indigenous expertise that is critical to the challenges our world faces. It highlights the responsibility I have to many generations of grandparents, likewise to my many generations of grandchildren. Mr. President, I did not travel all this way from my homelands to the motherland of British Empire to academicize my people. I came to tell our story. I was born to teenage parents who met on the steps of Parliament, speaking truth to power about the theft of our land and our language through colonial violence. I am a product of what we all know is a very ordinary occurrence in hearty activism when the passion of the streets takes to the sheets. Okay, if there were a few laughs, I was supposed to say that that gratuitous sex line was my first blatant grab for a laugh. So I'm not a comedian, but I am a citizen of the world, granted a privileged platform as a political leader. My parents gifted me with a responsibility to support our collective relationship-building work for a world that puts our shared dignity first, for a world passionately focused on the well-being of our oceans and forests and threatened species and climate, for a world that is accountable to injustice. My parents were part of an uprising of young Māori in the 1970s who had been dislocated to urban centres from their rural homelands. They questioned why their elders had denied them the poetry of their Indigenous tongue. Why did they not know their mountains and waters? Why were they disconnected from their kinspeople? Why are generations of our people driven into poverty while our stolen, pristine lands built generations of wealth for non-Māori farmers? The brutality of empire and colonisation stole my land and my language and defiled our knowledge, just like Don Brash did. I am far too self-righteous for your point of order. Indigenous resistance is bringing it back, decolonising structures of power, plants seed for change, Re-indigenizing the world embeds justice for the many and not just for the few. So, Mr. President, I have come to the other side of the world with my colonized ancestors and communities in size 16 font to oppose the notion that the House believes the sun should have never set on the British Empire. My proposition instead is that empires, in a broader sense, have yet to face nightfall. But the sooner the sun goes down on empire, the better, because its gluttony has left generational ruin around the world. There needs to be accountability and redress for this wrongdoing. And it is in this pathway to justice that we repair our relationships to each other and to our planet. Through relational work, we forge a future together where power is shared instead of weaponized. Now, we can all see that the sun threatens to set on imperial lust for the wealth of others, which is why it is digging even deeper right now. I see you, peoples of Palestine and Sudan, Congo and West Papua, Myanmar and Ukraine, and so many more current atrocities sharing the foundation of colonization. I see your dignity as empires shred their own. From my own country, I bring to this debate my grandmother, Patricia Charlotte, and the trauma she took to her grave after being in colonial schools, beaten for speaking the only language she knew. This silenced the Māori language in our family for the next 3 generations. Returning to a contemporary context, I see my Green MP colleagues fighting right now in our Parliament against laws that remove the obligation for schools to teach our native language and history. I see them fighting a bill right now that threatens the ability for Māori to challenge corporate infringement of Indigenous rights. These are legislative attacks against my people, our culture, and our sovereignty. It makes mockery of the goodwill and relationships that Māori and non-Māori have built up over many generations, despite the divisive and false rhetoric claiming Māori have extra privileges. Instead of privilege, the impact of empire today is ongoing injustice. It means that Māori are 3 times more likely to be prosecuted than non-Māori for committing the same offences. It means that Māori are disproportionately without housing, are disproportionately living in material hardship, and are unfairly denied basic services compared to non-Māori. But as we have seen tonight, the arguments of those normalising the supremacy and exploitation of empire are stale and unimaginative, peddling superiority with their full throats and without irony. And I get why it is hard to relinquish this empire fantasy. The project of colonisation has rather successfully been a vessel to carry out the cruelty of capitalism. When an economic system exploits people and our environment to hoard wealth for the few, it leaves those least responsible to bear the most harm from climate change, inequity, and environmental destruction. This is the mission of empire. A path of destruction is left behind for my people to clean up, while wealth was shipped back here to this land, but as Zara said, not for everybody. As this mission ran out of people and land to exploit and steal, the hardships fall not just on my people, but all those now struggling to access housing and healthcare, fair pay and working conditions, and the means to support their families. There lies the solidarity. While empires try to turn regular folk just trying to survive against each other, people still show up in community to support each other and reject the proposed division. This is where the hope is. In my country, hope looks like having a brand new public holiday, Matariki, the Māori New Year, as a day for remembering all of our ancestors. It looks like diverse peoples of Aotearoa standing together against racism and corporate greed in the largest protest we've ever seen in my country. It looks like Puke Moki Moki Marae, a meeting house in Hawke's Bay, becoming a crucial welfare hub for locals of all backgrounds following disastrous flooding. It looks like record numbers of people, not just Māori, embracing and honouring the Māori language. These are the stories of how empire falls. Mr. President, it is daunting to stand here as the first Māori woman to take part in the Oxford debates. I do want to acknowledge Makareti Papakura of Te Arawa people, the first Indigenous and Māori woman to study at Oxford over 100 years ago, who was last month posthumously awarded a master's degree. I also want to acknowledge the late Georgina Bayer, the first wahine Māori to address the Oxford Union. She came to share her experiences as a phenomenal politician who also happened to be a trans woman. Makareti and Georgina were relentlessly focused on their stories of home. I am humbled to stand with them in our unique truth as Indigenous women poised despite the patriarchy. I began my contribution with language. I will end it with my language also. Throughout my delivery, I cite the significance of my grandmother tongue through our stories of loss and reclamation. Empires understand the power of language as the threat to their cause, which is why they target it incessantly. This very Oxford Union was founded on the idea of freedom of speech. Well, you all would have loved my Nana. I dare hope that you would have been the first, especially you, Ben, to protect her right not just to speak, but to do it in her own language. Mr. President, I declare in the shadows of my ancestors that the sun must set not just on the British Empire, but the whole project of empire, and that accountability, redress, and a reset of power back to the collective of peoples is the only way that we will repair our connections back to each other and for our collective grandchildren. Now, I don't know how my ancestors somehow set me next to Don Brash tonight, but I implore you to vote, if your heart can find it, for humanity. And I will take that win, even if it means sharing it with someone who stood here and devalued my people. Mr. President, thank you for having me here tonight. Thanks to all of you for receiving my story. It really is a significant honour for my family and I. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa.